The Enduring Relevance of Enoch Powell. An Analysis of the Enemy Within speech of 1970 by Eternal England. The following is a speech which Enoch Powell gave at Turves Green Girls' School, Northfield, Birmingham, on Saturday the 13th of June, 1970. It has been condensed for brevity with irrelevances redacted. The Enemy Within. Britain, at this moment, is under attack. It is not surprising if many people still find that difficult to realize. A nation like our own, which has twice in this century had to defend itself by desperate sacrifice against an external enemy, instinctively continues to expect that danger will take the same form in the future. When we think of an enemy, we still visualize him in the shape of armored divisions or squadrons of aircraft or packs of submarines. But a nation's existence is not always threatened in the same way. The future of Britain is as much at risk now as in the years when Imperial Germany was building dreadnoughts or Nazism rearming. Indeed, the danger is greater today, just because the enemy is invisible or disguised, so that his preparations and advances go on hardly observed. When Czechoslovakia was dismembered, or Austria annexed, or Poland invaded, at least one saw that a shift of power had taken place. But in the last 3 years, events every bit as pregnant with peril have given no such physical signal. As we prepare to elect a new parliament, the menace is growing, as such dangers do, at an accelerating pace. Other nations before now have remained blind and supine before a rising danger from within until it was too late for them to save themselves. If we are to escape the same fate, it is high time we opened our eyes, for the first condition of self-defense is to see what it is we have to fear. I assert, then, that this country is today under attack by forces which aim at the actual destruction of our nation and society as we know or can imagine them. The same forces are at work in other Western countries too. Indeed, in some other countries they are more advanced than in this country. However, just as it is no consolation to be told by the Prime Minister that other nations have inflation too, so here there is no salvation in common peril. A plague is not less deadly because it is not confined to a single country. Nevertheless, it is useful to be able to register in terms of other countries as well as our own the advances which the enemy has made in the last 3 or at most 4 years. Let me remind you of them. In those 3 or 4 years, we have seen the universities of America being destroyed. Those institutions are now not merely the permanent scene of violence and disorder, but they exist and are administered upon terms dictated by the enemy. They have passed out of the control of authority. In the same period, we have seen the same enemy in his student manifestation not only terrorize one European city after another, but bring down one of the strongest European governments, the French government. In this country, we have seen the institutions of learning systematically threatened, browbeaten, and held up to ridicule by the organizers of disorder. So much for the universities, but civil government itself has been made to tremble by the mob, in its modern form, the demonstration. The exploitation of what is called race is a common factor which links the operations of the enemy on several different fronts. One of the most dangerous characteristics of any aggressor is the ability to make his intended victim underestimate his power. This characteristic the present enemy possesses to a high degree. Fortunately, people are heard saying, it is only a small minority which is involved. There could be no greater ineptitude. In any event, all revolutions are made by minorities, and usually small minorities. But those who talk in this way have not grasped the force and novelty of the new psychological weaponry with which they are being attacked. It is as if someone were to dismiss the invention of the nuclear weapon with the offhand remark that the bomb is only a very small one. It is small, yes, but it is nuclear. The power of the minority which, though still only in its infancy, we have been seeing exerted here and elsewhere during the last few years, derives from its hold over men's minds. The majority are rendered passive and helpless by a devilishly simple, yet devilishly subtle, technique. This is to assert manifest absurdities as if they were self-evident truths. By dint of repetition of the absurdities, echoed, re-echoed, and amplified by all the organs of communication, the majority are reduced to a condition in which they finally mistrust their own senses and their own reason, and surrender their will to the manipulator. In all war, the object is to break the opponent's will. Our danger is that the enemy has mastered the art of establishing a moral ascendancy over his victims and destroying their good conscience. People observing the advance of anarchy call for more police, more punishment, more force. These may indeed be necessary, but in themselves they are impotent. In fact, they can become additional weapons in the enemy's armory, unless the battle is simultaneously fought and won in the moral sphere. The decisive act is to put sense and nonsense, truth and absurdity back into their right places, and that act is already so difficult that conventional wisdom and polite society have come to regard it as impossible. Have you ever wondered, perhaps, why opinions which the majority of people quite naturally hold are, if anyone dares express them publicly, denounced as controversial, extremist, explosive, disgraceful, and overwhelmed with a violence and venom quite unknown to debate on mere political issues? It is because the whole power of the aggressor depends on preventing people from seeing what is happening and from saying what they see. The most perfect and the most dangerous example of this process is the subject miscalled, and deliberately miscalled, race. The people of this country are told that they must feel neither alarm nor objection to a West Indian, African, and Asian population which will rise to several millions being introduced into this country. If they do, they are prejudiced, racialist, unchristian, and failing to show an example to the rest of the world. A current situation and the future prospect which only a few years ago would have appeared to everyone not merely intolerable, but frankly incredible, has to be represented as if welcomed by all rational and right-thinking people. The public are literally made to say that black is white. Newspapers like the Sunday Times denounce it as spouting the fantasies of racial purity, to say that a child born of English parents in Peking is not Chinese but English, or that a child born of Indian parents in Birmingham is not English but Indian. It is even heresy to assert the plain fact that the English are a white nation. Whether those who take part know it or not, this process of brainwashing by repetition of manifest absurdities is a sinister and deadly weapon. In the end, it renders the majority, who are marked down to be the victims of violence or revolution or tyranny, incapable of self-defense by depriving them of their wits and convincing them that what they thought was right is wrong, what they thought was real is unreal. The process has already gone perilously far when political parties at a general election dare not discuss a subject which results from and depends on political action, and which for millions of electors transcends all others in importance. But this is only one example, for there is no end to the use of absurdity, like obscenity, as a weapon for brain smashing. We are told that the economic achievement of the Western countries has been at the expense of the rest of the world and has impoverished them, so that what are called the developed countries owe a duty to hand over tax-produced aid to the governments of the undeveloped countries. It is nonsense, manifest, arrant nonsense. But it is nonsense with which the people of the Western countries, clergy and laity, but clergy especially, have been so deluged and saturated that in the end they feel ashamed of what the brains and energy of Western mankind have done, and sink on their knees to apologize for being civilized and ask to be insulted and humiliated. For many people it is lifting a corner of the veil. For the first time they catch a glimpse of the enemy and his power. If so, it is timely. The power lies in what we are made to say or not say, and thus ultimately made to think or not to think. That power can only be broken by plain truth and common sense, and the will to assert it loud and clear. Without that, there is no escape from the closing trap, no victory over those who hate Britain and wish to destroy it. The people have it in their hands to elect men who will dare to speak what they themselves know to be the truth. Analysis. Powell starts his speech by stating that we are under attack from an enemy within. We are used to seeing enemies from without, he says, referencing the 2 world wars, so it is taking people much longer to notice the building danger. The attack is allowed to fly under the radar, possibly until it is too late. He speaks of the need to recognize, and to make others recognize, the threat which looms over us. In a brilliant line, He states that the first condition of self-defense is to see what it is we have to fear. Powell makes reference to the widespread protests across the Western world in 1968. Everything which Powell says here, more than 50 years ago, is incredibly relevant. He speaks about the universities being overtaken by leftists. This was part of the long march through the institutions, whereby leftists realized that in order to destroy Western societies and bring about the communist utopia, they would have to infiltrate the institutions which shape culture, such as the media, universities, primary and secondary education, and so on. With regard to the topic of the 1968 protests, it is easy to see the connections to the current day. Just think of all the protests, demonstrations, and riots we have seen in the past 3 or 4 years. The mostly peaceful Black Lives Matter riots, the pro-Palestine marches across the world today. Leftists and their useful idiots find any excuse for a demonstration. It is a show of force. The Conservative government has, in recent years, folded under pressure from the media multiple times. See Boris's resignation following Partygate, Truss's resignation, Suella Braverman's sacking, as just a few examples. One of the most dangerous characteristics of any aggressor is the ability to make his intended victim underestimate his power. It is an incredible line, which should be spread far and wide. It speaks to a deep truth, which many people understand, if only implicitly. The left's subversion relies, in large part, on its plausible deniability. Drawing attention to smaller action the left undertakes can always be brushed off as paranoid conspiracy theorizing. It is only those who look deeply enough to notice the patterns who become aware of the level of political and philosophical infiltration the left has effected. The power of the minority derives from its hold over men's minds, is a line which hits hard. A self-confident minority, hell-bent on victory, if it can infiltrate and subvert the institutions of culture, can propagandize the mass very effectively, creating an outsized shift in the cultural consciousness, and thereby affecting a broader paradigm shift through the back door, so to speak. It is a method of incremental movement which becomes exponential success. It builds on its previous gains by marginalizing and humiliating its opponents in order to continue pushing onwards. Every action undertaken by the left is designed to push the Overton window leftward, which serves the dual purpose of making left-wing talking points previously considered too radical seem innocuous, while restricting those on the right. As the dialectic progresses, conservative views which were once commonplace become unsayable. Powell is touching on the concept of demoralization here, a method of neo-Marxist subversion later outlined eloquently by the former KGB agent Yuri Bezmenov in a 1984 interview with G. Edward Griffin. The subtle technique is to assert manifest absurdities as if they were self-evident truths. By dint of repetition of the absurdities, echoed, re-echoed, and amplified by all the organs of communication, the majority are reduced to a condition in which they finally mistrust their own senses and their own reason, and surrender their will to the manipulator. The repetition of manifest absurdities. What a phrase. This speech is from 53 years ago, but it remains incredibly relevant to today. One tactic which we must employ in the culture war is to bring about a state of affairs where, when people hear the mantras of trans women are women, diversity is our strength, silence is violence, and so on, their immediate thought is, this is a manifest absurdity. The mass already has a reflexive difficulty swallowing these statements due to their illogic, but we must make the arguments for why these slogans are false, and give the masses the tools to understand their falsity. In all war, the object is to break the opponent's will, calls back to the previous discussion of demoralization. In a society where leftists have taken over the institutions of media and education, it is very simple for them to push their historical revisionism onto the people of Britain, making such absurd claims as Black Britons built Stonehenge, and repeating them endlessly until they become accepted fact. There is a quote, often attributed to Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels: "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it." Many young people are so disillusioned from anti-British propaganda in schools and in the media that they either do not know or do not care that Britain is being deconstructed from within, and will be irrevocably destroyed if the left gets its way. Powell goes on to make the poignant observation that, while we may be correct in calling for more policing, more punishment, and more force in the face of the growing anarchy, the battle must be simultaneously fought and won in the moral sphere. It is not enough to only defend ourselves from the enemy, as we will be ground down over time and exhausted. Leftists never tire. We must also make the public cognizant of the battle playing out, and convince them that we are on the correct side. We must sharpen our arguments against the forces of the left, to make their task of falsely portraying us as evil much more difficult. We must break free of the paradigm in which the left has enveloped us. We must show the manifest absurdities of the left for what they are, and make the masses aware of these absurdities and the purpose of their repetition. One method by which this will be achieved is through relentless satire. As Martin Luther said, the best way to drive out the devil is to jeer and flout him, for he cannot bear scorn. This is also true of leftists. They cannot stand being ridiculed. They cannot stand having their own illogic used against them. So we need relentless satire. Comedy is an effective weapon against tyranny, as the tyrants are either forced to allow themselves to be humiliated or forced to react. It is difficult to claim moral legitimacy while suppressing comedians. The next few lines are so important that they bear repeating in full. Remember, this speech was made in 1970, but how perfectly it applies to the current day culture war. Have you ever wondered, perhaps, why opinions which the majority of people quite naturally hold are, if anyone dares express them publicly, denounced as controversial, extremist, explosive, disgraceful, and overwhelmed with a violence and venom quite unknown to debate on mere political issues? It is because the whole power of the aggressor depends on preventing people from seeing what is happening and from saying what they see. This quote is so prescient that it could have been written yesterday. Powell really understood the power of language. He was a polyglot and philologist after all. He understood the Orwellian tactics of the left, whereby they denounce commonplace opinion as beyond the pale, in order to shift the Overton window and make their absurdities seem more legitimate. Britons are naturally, instinctively, a conservative people. They do not like large-scale change, as it is potentially dangerous. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, after all. Another quote. A current situation and a future prospect which only a few years ago would have appeared to everyone not merely intolerable, but frankly incredible, has to be represented as if welcomed by all rational and right-thinking people. They simultaneously make ordinary beliefs unsayable and make the manifestly absurd into an opinion expected to be held by all rational people. It is genius, and it is treacherous. So this is the weapon which we must turn against the left. We must attack their absurdities while reasserting the truths which have been clouded over with their poison. Powell then goes on to talk about a common feature of the discourse today, that of the stripping of ethnicity from nationality. The idea of ethnicity has been attacked in the liberal paradigm we inherit. As he says, to say that a child born of English parents in Peking is not Chinese but English, or that a child born of Indian parents in Birmingham is not English but Indian, has become a heresy, a fantasy of racial purity. The term British has ceased to be a signifier denoting one of English, Welsh or Scottish descent, and now means one who is a citizen of the United Kingdom either by birth or by naturalization. That is fair enough. It is useful to have a signifier relating to and covering all citizens of this country, and it helps to inspire a sense of civic patriotism in immigrants and children of immigrants by conferring a sense of belonging on them. But ethnicity is still real. England is still, after all, the land of the English. Nowadays, even self-professed conservatives will tell you that a child born in England from immigrant parents is just as English as a child born of English parents. Have you ever had an immigrant or child of immigrants tell you that they are just as English as you? I have, and it's incredibly frustrating because, in the current day in which one has to be very careful with his words, one risks being denounced as a Nazi if he misspeaks on this issue. One can become British, regardless of ethnicity. One cannot become English. While it is correct that all citizens should enjoy the same rights, it is quite another thing to decide that the culture and customs of the native population should be subordinated to please those who have arrived only very recently and do not possess the same historic ties to this land. Worst of all, we were never even asked. It was foisted on us by successive governments. As Douglas Murray said in a recent trigonometry interview, the left has this idea of the idyllic, Edenic first populations of America, the indigenous peoples, and then people from Europe came. They just put this version of history onto other places. To those people, I would say, fine, you can do that if you want. Now let's do Britain. Want to play that game? You'd better not get the British started. You want to play the indigenous people own the land first and the other people should fuck off game? Well, we've had 70 years of mass migration into the UK. Who are the indigenous peoples of the UK? The people who've been here the longest. Who are the settlers? Well, that would be the people who just arrived. Powell then draws attention to the fact that political parties dare not discuss a subject which for millions of voters transcends all others in importance. The vast majority of Britons are vehemently opposed to mass immigration. The Conservatives have won consecutive elections on manifestos promising a steep reduction in migration numbers. Many politicians are, understandably, afraid to speak on the topic of mass immigration and the failure of multiculturalism for fear of cancellation. Others simply don't really care about it, such as Jacob Rees-Mogg, who has stated that his problem with immigration is a problem of numbers and integration, not that of the land belonging to the descendants of those who built it in order to pass it on to them. Powell then touches on the notion that Western nations owe the undeveloped countries for building their wealth on those countries' impoverishment. We see constantly the idea pushed that we owe African nations reparations for the actions of the past. In A Eulogy for England, I make the case that we in Britain have already paid our reparations manyfold. To close, Powell draws back to the Orwellian tactics of the left by stating that the power lies in what we are made to say or not say, and thus ultimately made to think or not think. That power can only be broken by plain truth and common sense, and the will to assert it loud and clear. Without that, there is no escape from the closing trap, no victory over those who hate Britain and wish to destroy it. This quote invokes Orwell to such an extent that it could have been written by him. It is disheartening to see that people have been arguing against the exact same issues for 50 years and more. The timeline has moved on a lot since then, and England is in a much worse state than in Powell's time. He, in his Rivers of Blood speech, said that we must be mad to be importing 50,000 immigrants a year. We are now importing more than 10 times that amount per year. His speech outlines the problem brilliantly, with his usual eloquence. The fact that he was cancelled in his own day when an estimated 67 to 82% of the country, depending on the poll, agreed with his diagnosis is a terrible shame and a testament to the cowardice of many politicians. It has been said that Enoch Powell's cancellation made it impossible to have a constructive conversation about immigration for a generation. I think we would do well to revive Enoch Powell's thoughts and words, both because they are incredibly prophetic and useful, but also to serve as an example of somebody fearlessly raising the very same issues which we face today more than 50 years ago, when they were much less problematic than they are now. We must show people just how serious the problem has gotten since then, and make the case that we cannot afford to allow mass immigration to continue unfettered for another 50 years if we still wish to have an England. We cannot be afraid of cancellation. They cannot cancel all of us. We must speak with one voice against the woke mob. They are a loud minority, but they are a minority. All they understand is power and pressure. The only remedy to the shrieking of the woke mob is to drown it out with a chorus of righteous, confident indignation.